Hello there, this is Not a Seagull. I am going to do a group of interest tier list. In case you don't know what they are, in the SCP universe, there are a lot of groups of interest, which are these guys. They're essentially groups of people who also know that things are anomalous. Sometimes they even make their own anomalies. And that's why the Foundation or whoever is trying to track them down. And there's quite a few. I think there's around 33 in here. And I hope to organize them all into tiers. If you aren't familiar with this system, S is the best, F is the worst, and everything in between goes incrementally. Now, just gonna put a big disclaimer at the beginning. This is all my opinion. Yes, I have my own preferences. I haven't read everything belonging to each group of interest. I don't have time to. But I hope that I can express my opinion here in a way that sits well with everyone. So without further ado, let's get into it. First things first, the Foundation itself. The SCP Foundation is S tier, obviously. If it wasn't S tier, if it wasn't as interesting as it is, we wouldn't have a wiki. We wouldn't have all these other groups of interest. And I really think that we'd be doing it a disservice to put in anything lower than S tier. I think this is Nobody. Nobody's a bit of an interesting group of interest because he's not really a group. He's more of just one person. I think the story is that he used to be like a big group, but then the author took all of the references of said group off the wiki, so now it's referred to as Nobody. And there's actually a bunch of really interesting tales around Nobody. Like, I remember reading one about how he's actually just a cover-up used by Foundation agents to keep the higher-ups from asking questions about failures in their work. And I honestly find him really interesting, even in the modern interpretation, so I'm going to put him in the A tier. The Factory is, when it's done well, it's really good. If you haven't read Bright's 001 proposal, I would really recommend doing that. But the Factory, it's really hard to write. Like, I've actually tried writing a Factory SCP before, but it's just really hard to get right. So I'm gonna put it in the B tier. Like, it'd be A tier, but there's just so few good things about the Factory on the site that it's kind of outweighed by the bad there. But still really good, so B. The Black Queen, I'm gonna put it in the F tier. Black Queen is sort of basically the story behind the Black Queen is that she's Dr. Gears' daughter, which is sort of a holdover from the era of the site where it was pretty much just a sitcom with Dr. Bright and Dr. Clef and Dr. Gears and Dr. Kondraki and all those people. But we are not in that era anymore. There's been some attempts to make a more modern interpretation of the Black Queen, but in my opinion, they failed, so I'm going to put it in the F tier. I know it's probably going to make someone mad, I'm sorry about that. Alexia University. I'll be honest, I haven't read that much of their stuff. But I think I remember reading an SCP about a microchip they created, but I can't really remember anything else. It just doesn't really have a presence on the wiki. I'm going to put it in the E tier. Are We Cool Yet? It's an interesting group of interests. They're essentially artists that can make anomalous art for expressions. And when it's done well, it's pretty good. And even when it's not done that well, it's still pretty good. So I'm gonna put it in the B tier. Because it definitely could be a lot better. There could be a lot more added to Are We Cool Yet to make it A tier or maybe even S tier. But for now, I'm just gonna put it in the B tier. So, next up, we're going to do Wilson's Wildlife Solutions, which is actually a relatively new group of interest. Honestly, I don't like it that much. Like, it's good, but it's not actually that good. Like, I haven't written a WWS skip. I'm not planning on doing so. And most of the WWS stuff I've seen just doesn't resonate with me that well. I'm really undecided between C and D, so I'm gonna put it in. I'll put it in C for now, and maybe move it if I start getting indecision. Anderson Robotics. So the story behind a lot of groups of interest actually is that there's one person that principally writes the stuff behind most of them. Anderson Robotics is one of those groups of interest. And honestly, the stuff I've seen from Anderson Robotics is really good. It's mostly written by a user named Jacob Conwell, I think. I might be missing some stuff, but overall it's a really interesting deep dive into sentience and robots. And sometimes it's even really emotional, which I don't get from a lot of SCPs on the site. So I'm going to put in the, no, not B, A tier. The Church of the Broken God. What can I really say about this? I think it was like the first real group of interest other than the Foundation. And it really shows, because it's at heart, it's really simple. It's just cultists who want to reunite their god, and they think that machines are a way to do that. But once you get down into it, the lore is really deep, because there's Maxwellism, which is the god is on the internet, let's find him. There's a lot of really interesting figures, and honestly, it's really fulfilling to read about. It's probably one of the best GOIs on the site, so I'm going to put it in the S tier. Chaos Insurgency. I really don't like them, because the idea of the Chaos Insurgency was, from day one pretty much, was the bad guys. And there's been attempts to make it more interesting than that, but they've all really fallen flat for me. And it's really just mostly, these guys are a sector of the Foundation that became evil and wants to use anomalies for their own good. I'm going to put in the D tier. They have some interesting stories, but it never really pans out in the same way. Parawatch is the newest group of interest on the site, and as a framing device, it's a really good framing device. It can tell a lot of really interesting stories in ways that the SCP format or any of these other groups of interest can't. However, as a group of interest, I don't find it that interesting. It's pretty much just anomalous 4chan. So as a framing device, it's A tier. As a group of interest, it's E tier. So I'm just gonna meet in the middle and do C tier. Horizon Initiative. I'll be honest, if you got me on the spot and asked me, what does the Horizon Initiative do? What's their main idea? I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you. They have next to no presence on the wiki, and I honestly had to look them up to actually find out what they were all about. So I'm going to put them in the E tier. The Global Occult Coalition. Again, they have some good stories, but they aren't really that interesting, because they're pretty much, what if the Foundation wanted to destroy stuff? There's some really good GOC works on the site, mainly the chair. Like, the chair is the thing that everyone thinks of when you think of the Global Occult Coalition, and that almost single-handedly brings it up from D tier to C tier. So it's a good idea, but it's just not that interesting, I don't think. Jamia. I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of this group until I looked them up on the group of interest site, the page on the Foundation website, which kind of really says all you need to know. They just aren't that interesting. They're pretty much just the Japanese version of GRU Division P. I wish they were more interesting, but really, I'm going to put in the F tier. It's pretty much all I need to know. GRU Division P, speaking of which, is a good group of interest. They're pretty much the Soviet Union's arm into the anomalous, and their main point is the Soviet Union creating anomalies. And it's mainly a part of the Cool War canon, or Coldest War. Cool War and Coldest War are two completely different things. And it's a dense canon, but it's definitely fun to get into. Unfortunately, I don't see them that much outside of that. So I'm kind of conflicted between B and C tier. I'll go with B, I might move it down later. Marshall, Carter, and Dark. I really don't like these guys. Like, they have interesting stories, they have a really good GUI format, but they aren't that interesting, as in, I never go out of my way to read MC and D stuff, and if I were to get linked in MC and D, SCP, or GUI format, I probably wouldn't read it. It's pretty perfect in the D tier, ironically, MC and D. Gamers against Weed. Let's be honest, I really don't like these guys. They're really similar to Are We Cool Yet? AWC. Most of the GAW stuff just feels like AWC stuff, but with a chat room attached. And the main point of GAW is to be a character piece, but the characters don't really resonate with me. You could make a good argument that should be higher, but I'm going to put it in the F tier. That's probably going to make someone angry, and I apologize for that. 3 Moons. Now, 3 Moons is a bit interesting because it's another one of those groups of interest where it's just one person doing all the work, or most of the work at least. They're pretty interesting, if I do say so myself, but I just don't see a lot of them. Like, their whole thing is that there's some interdimensional police force, I think, which is another drawback to them. They don't really have any clear definition. So I'm going to put in the C tier. It could pretty easily be B tier if there was more to it. Like, if there was more substance, like more clear definition. Ambrose Restaurants is honestly probably the goofiest group of interest in this entire platter, because you have religions, robotics companies, the Soviet Union, but they're a restaurant chain. Anomalous restaurant chain. You know, I really wish it leaned more into that goofy idea, because imagine if there was a tale where the Foundation tries to break into a restaurant, but the restaurant owner was like, oh no, they're breaking in, quick, release the pizza missiles, or stuff like that. If there was a tale like that, it'd be A tier. But for now, I'm going to put it in the C tier. A lot of C tiers here, I guess. Roy. Honestly, it's the weirdest one on here. Like, even with all the weirdness so far, it's pretty much, I can't even really describe it here. It's like a bunch of people that live in your imagination is the best way I can really describe that, and I know that all people are going to be mad at me because I just described it completely wrong. But it's a good group of interest. It has some very talented writers, but it's just confusing. It's kind of demonstrated. You can't really give an elevator pitch for it. And to get invested into the stuff, you kind of have to learn quite a bit of lore. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Prometheus Labs. So basically there's 2 versions of Prometheus Labs on the site, from what I understand. There's what's in all of the SCPs, like SCP-148 is a Prometheus Labs SCP, if I remember right. And then there's the Third Law version. Now, Third Law is a canon, so it's a bunch of tales and SCPs and other things set in a shared universe. But the main problem is that both of those don't really interest me. Like, the main version of Prometheus Labs, it's just a lab that sells anomalous technology. There's not really that much backing to it. There's not that much lore. And Third Law is just so dense that I've never really had time to read it. And yeah, D tier. This is Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. And again, this is Yeah, another one of those groups of interest where it's principally written by only one person. I think their name is Dr. Chandra, or Chandra. I don't know how to pronounce it. But it's actually really good, as in, there's a lot of tales, which are all, at the very least, somewhat entertaining, and generally really entertaining. The idea is simple. It's a circus, but there's a lot of characters and lore if you really go into it. And all in all, it's just a really fun concept. So I'm gonna put it in the S tier, actually. Just really good. Group of interest. Shark Punching Center. So I don't really consider this that much of a group of interest. It started as a joke because some people would mistype SCP as SPC. And then it kind of turned to a group of interest off of that. And I don't know. Like, there's a lot of lore behind it, but it's just kind of dense and confusing to get into, especially when you know that it just started as a joke in the first place. I'm kind of debating between E and F tier. I'll just put into E tier. I know someone's gonna get mad at me about that, and I'm sorry. So Dr. Wonder Tainment, he's pretty much a toy maker. He makes toys, does all the classic toy stuff. And I haven't seen a lot of him lately. I think it's just because, well, it's kind of hard to turn toy that does something into a narrative in the modern SCP universe. But I really like him. Like, it's a simple idea, and there's a lot of depth to it. Like, the only thing keeping this from S tier is the fact that it's hard to put into a modern SCP. Other than that, it's a really easy A tier for me. Dear College is another entry in the third law canon, I think. And it's essentially an extra-dimensional college. And like I said, I'm not really that interested in Third Law. I haven't read it. I'm not really planning on reading it. So I'm going to put it in the E tier. Because it's an interesting idea. I just wish that wasn't so strongly associated with the Third Law. Because otherwise it'd be really good. Okay, the Wanderer's Library. This is going to be a controversial one because there are some people that hate the Wanderer's Library. There are some people that love the Wanderer's Library. I'm sort of in the middle. Like, it's a good group of interest. It's got personality. It's got a good group of interest format. I just never found it that appealing, you know? Like, it's hard to write. Like, it even has its own wiki for it to show you how much people can love it. But personally, I've never really seen the appeal. You can make an argument that's S tier, you can make an argument that's F tier. I'm just going to put into C tier and hope that I don't get kicked out of the wiki for that. Fifism. Like, you know how I said Oneroy was the strangest group of interest on the site? Fifism just blows that out of the water. And I don't think I've ever seen a bad Fifism skip. Like, that might just be because it's hard to write. I've tried to write one before, it's just extremely difficult. But whenever I see a Fifism skip, I'm like, yeah, that's an extremely good SCP, good job to whoever wrote that. For that, I'm going to put in the A tier. Chicago Spirit is definitely an interesting group of interests. It's essentially a gang that was active during the Roaring 20s, back when people were shipping alcohol everywhere. And they got busted in the 30s, so they're not active anymore. And I really like these historical groups of interest, like GRU, Division P, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. I feel like it could be better. Like, the lore is a bit hard to get into, but once you're into it, it's pretty good. UIU, more like UI useless, am I right, F tier. That is a joke, by the way. I really think it's a perfect example of something that's D tier. It could be interesting, and there are some interesting things about it, but it's just not that executed well, and really, it's just not that great. It's just the US government. The SCP Foundation was pretty originally the US government. So, D tier. Mana Charitable Foundation is... I honestly know nothing about this group of interest. I think it's appeared in a couple of SCPs. Like, it's supposed to be like a non-profit, and they're trying to help people. I've never really seen the appeal for them, because I just don't like them that much. They don't really have many interesting characters that I know of. I haven't read most of their stuff. I'm gonna put it in the E tier. Sarcasm. This would be E tier. However, there's a user named Metaphysician who has pretty much single-handedly brought this up to A tier. They've written a lot of stuff for this GOI, and all that stuff is, if it were in an SCP ranking tier, it'd be either S tier or A tier. Like, there's a lot of bad stuff about Sarcasm, which is why it is an S tier, but still a really good group of interest. It has a lot of lore behind it, and honestly, it's one of the only groups of interest I'm really scared of. Like, not scared of writing, but scared of as in, when I read stuff about it, I get scared. So yeah. Honestly, I don't know what that logo is. I kind of forgot. I kind of just download all these logos off the group of interest page. So let me just refresh my memory real quick. Church of the Second Hightop. That's why I didn't recognize it. This is actually the second newest group of interest on the site. From what I understand, it's a bit like Fifithism, but it's worshipping some space deity. Like, there's a lot of space stuff in this entry. But I haven't read that much of it, but what I've read of it is pretty good. Could be better. I'm going to put it in the C tier. Last but not least is Uriah, the Office of Reclamation for Islamic Artifacts. So now, I don't know that much about these guys actually, which is kind of why I saved them for last. Like, it's mostly two authors that have written this one, and I honestly haven't read much of its stuff, but what I've read of it is pretty good, so I'll put it in B tier, why not? Actually, you know what, if I have to say why not, it's in the C tier, let's be honest. So that's pretty much it. As you can see, I kind of have a normal distribution around here. And I'm going to emphasize again, this is my opinion, and is not absolute. So, feel free to make your own tier list if you disagree with this one. And I know that I didn't include a lot of groups of interest. I only included ones from the official group of interest page on the SCP Wiki. So there's a handful of groups that have been left out, like Eric and oh yeah, speaking of which, Dado is SS tier. This is not up for debate, and if you disagree with me on this, you're wrong. Bye.